Welcome back to Simply About Earth, where we journey through the forgotten corridors of human history, one ancient whisper at a time. Tonight we're traveling to the very cradle of civilization itself, to a land between two rivers where humanity first learned to write, to build cities, to look up at the stars, and wonder about their place in the cosmic dance. But before we begin this journey into the mists of time, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from tonight. Maybe you're settling in somewhere quiet, far from the bustle of the modern world, or perhaps you're listening from a place where the echoes of ancient voices still seem to whisper in the wind. We love knowing where our global community gathers to explore these hidden chapters of our shared past. Mesopotamia, the very word, carries the weight of forgotten ages, doesn't it? From the Greek meaning between rivers. This was the land cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates, where the first cities rose from river mud and human ambition. Here, in what we now call Iraq, Kuwait, and parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran, here is where everything began. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine, over 5,000 years ago, when most of the world still wandered in nomadic tribes, following herds and seasons, in this fertile crescent, something extraordinary was happening. People were choosing to stay in one place, to build permanent homes, to plant crops that would feed not just families but entire communities. They were creating something the world had never seen before, civilization itself. But this isn't just the story of humanity's first great leap forward. It's also the story of empires that rose like mountains and fell like leaves, of kings who claimed to speak with gods and queens who ruled with wisdom that still echoes today. It's the story of inventions so fundamental we take them for granted. Writing, the wheel, mathematics, law, all born in this ancient land between two rivers. Tonight we'll walk together through 5 millennia of human triumph and tragedy, from the first Sumerian city-states to the mighty Babylonian Empire, from the world's first legal code to gardens that hung like heaven on earth. We'll meet Sargon the Great, who forged the world's first multi-ethnic empire, Hammurabi, whose laws would echo through the centuries, Nebuchadnezzar, who built wonders that men called impossible, and we'll witness the slow, inevitable decline, how climate change, war, and the shifting sands of time buried these mighty civilizations so thoroughly that for centuries they existed only in myth and legend, until modern archaeologists began digging and found that the myths were memory and the legends were real. So settle in, let the modern world fade away, and step with us into the dawn of human civilization, where every discovery changed the world and every empire thought it would last forever. The story begins, as many great stories do, with water. Picture, if you will, a landscape unlike anything most of us have ever seen, the Mesopotamian plain around 3500 BCE, when the Ice Age was finally loosening its grip on the northern world. Two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, flowing down from the mountains of Anatolia and the Zagros, carrying not just water but the gift of life itself, fertile silt that would turn a harsh landscape into humanity's first garden. But this wasn't the gentle, predictable flooding of the Nile. Oh no, the Mesopotamian rivers were wild, unpredictable, sometimes bringing life-giving floods, sometimes devastating deluges that could wipe out entire settlements, sometimes refusing to flood at all, leaving crops to wither under the merciless sun. It was here, in this challenging landscape, that humans first learned one of civilization's most crucial lessons, that survival required not just individual strength, but collective action. The rivers could be tamed, but only by communities working together. Canals had to be dug, maintained, defended. Irrigation systems required planning, coordination, hierarchy. And from this necessity, from this simple need to manage water, came the seeds of the first cities, the first governments, the first laws. Imagine being there at the very beginning, around 3200 BCE, when the first Sumerian cities were taking shape. Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, names that sound like poetry now, but were once bustling centers of human activity, unlike anything the world had ever seen. For the first time in human history, people were living in settlements of thousands, then tens of thousands. These weren't just larger versions of the farming villages that had dotted the landscape for centuries. These were something entirely new, specialized communities where not everyone farmed, where some people could dedicate their entire lives to crafts or trade or warfare or, perhaps most importantly, to thinking, to recording, to preserving knowledge for future generations. And it was here, in these first cities, that humans invented something that would change everything: writing. Picture a Sumerian scribe, perhaps named Enlil-bani, sitting in the shade of a temple wall around 3100 BCE, in his hands a reed stylus and a tablet of wet clay. Before him, symbols, not pictures exactly, but abstract marks that represent sounds, ideas, quantities. He's recording something mundane, perhaps a list of barley rations, or the number of sheep in the temple's flock. But Enlil-bani doesn't know he's making history. He doesn't realize that these marks in clay will outlast bronze, outlast stone, outlast the very civilization that created them. He doesn't know that thousands of years later, archaeologists will hold his tablets with trembling hands, reading his words and hearing, across the vast silence of millennia, the voice of humanity learning to speak to its future self. Cuneiform, from the Latin for wedge-shaped, was humanity's first writing system. Starting as simple pictographs, it evolved into a sophisticated system capable of recording not just transactions and inventories, but literature, law, science, philosophy. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, was pressed into clay tablets in cuneiform, a tale of friendship, loss, and the search for immortality that still moves us today. But writing wasn't the only gift these ancient Mesopotamians gave to the world. They were inventors, engineers, astronomers, mathematicians. They gave us the wheel, not just for transportation, but for pottery, for lifting water, for all the countless applications that would transform human life. They developed the first mathematical systems, base 60 mathematics that we still use today when we divide hours into minutes and minutes into seconds. They looked up at the night sky and saw not chaos but patterns. They charted the movements of planets and stars, created the first calendars, divided the year into 12 months and the day into 24 hours. They were the first to recognize that mathematical principles govern the heavens, that the cosmos operates according to laws that human minds can understand. And perhaps most importantly, they invented the concept of law itself. If you're enjoying this journey through the cradle of civilization so far, we'd love it if you could hit that like button. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten stories to light, one ancient mystery at a time. Around 1750 BCE, in the great city of Babylon, a king named Hammurabi was contemplating a problem that had plagued human societies since the first communities formed: how to create justice, how to ensure that the strong don't simply dominate the weak, that disputes are settled fairly, that society operates according to principles rather than mere power. Hammurabi's solution was revolutionary: a written code of laws carved in stone for all to see. The Code of Hammurabi wasn't the first legal system, but it was the first to be written down, codified, made permanent. 282 laws covering everything from trade disputes to family relationships to the treatment of slaves. The famous principle, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, comes from Hammurabi's code, though this is often misunderstood. Far from encouraging revenge, this was actually a restraint on punishment, ensuring that justice was proportional, that the penalty fit the crime. Before Hammurabi, disputes were often settled by blood feuds that could escalate into generational warfare. The code brought reason, proportion, predictability to the administration of justice. But Hammurabi was just one link in a chain of remarkable rulers who shaped Mesopotamian civilization, each building on the achievements of those who came before, each adding their own chapter to humanity's unfolding story. Let's step back in time to around 2334 BCE and meet perhaps the most remarkable of them all, Sargon of Akkad, known to history as Sargon the Great. Sargon's story begins like something from mythology: a baby found floating in a basket on the Euphrates River, rescued and raised by a gardener, rising through sheer ability and ambition to become cupbearer to the king of Kish. But this wasn't mythology. This was history in the making. When Sargon seized power and founded the Akkadian Empire, he created something the world had never seen: a multi-ethnic state that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. For over 150 years, Akkadian rule brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to Mesopotamia. Trade routes connected distant lands, cultures mixed and learned from each other, art and literature flourished under imperial patronage. Sargon understood something that many later conquerors would forget: that true power comes not from crushing your enemies, but from convincing them to join you. The Akkadian Empire succeeded because it absorbed and celebrated the diverse cultures it conquered, creating a cosmopolitan civilization that was truly greater than the sum of its parts. But empires, even great ones, are fragile things, and the Akkadian Empire eventually fell to a combination of external invasion and internal rebellion. For a brief, chaotic period, Mesopotamia was ruled by the mysterious Gutians, mountain people from the Zagros who left few records of their time in power. Then, around 2100 BCE, came the Sumerian revival, the third dynasty of Ur, which restored native rule to southern Mesopotamia and created one of the most sophisticated administrative states the ancient world had ever seen. Under kings like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi, Ur became a center of learning, literature, and legal innovation that influenced the entire region. The Sumerians were remarkable in their attention to detail, their love of order and organization. They kept meticulous records of everything from tax collection to religious festivals. Thanks to their bureaucratic thoroughness, we know more about daily life in Sumerian cities than we do about many societies that lived much later. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Sumerian civilization was their religious worldview, a complex mythology that saw gods and goddesses as deeply involved in human affairs, requiring constant attention, worship, and appeasement. Imagine walking through the streets of Ur around 2000 BCE, the massive ziggurat of Nana, the moon god dominating the skyline. These weren't just temples, they were artificial mountains, reaching toward heaven, designed to bring humans closer to the divine realm. Each city had its own patron deity, its own elaborate rituals, its own priestly hierarchies. The Mesopotamians saw themselves as servants of the gods, created to provide food, worship, and entertainment for divine beings, who were powerful but also remarkably human in their emotions and motivations. Gods could be jealous, vindictive, loving, generous. They had families, made alliances, fought wars among themselves. This theological worldview shaped everything in Mesopotamian society: law, politics, economics, art. Kings ruled not by their own authority, but as representatives of the gods. Justice wasn't just a human concern, but a cosmic principle maintained by divine will. And yet, for all their religious devotion, the Mesopotamians were supremely practical people. They were traders, engineers, farmers, craftsmen. They built the first cities, developed the first complex irrigation systems, created the first standardized weights and measures for trade. By 1900 BCE, Mesopotamian merchants were traveling from India to Anatolia, creating trade networks that connected civilizations across thousands of miles. In the archives of Kanesh, in modern Turkey, archaeologists have found thousands of clay tablets detailing the business activities of Assyrian merchants, contracts, letters, account books that read like the correspondence of any modern trading company. These merchants weren't just exchanging goods. They were spreading ideas, technologies, cultural practices. The cuneiform writing system spread throughout the region, adapted to record different languages: Akkadian, Hittite, Elamite, Hurrian. Mesopotamian mathematical and astronomical knowledge influenced cultures from Egypt to India. But it was in the realm of literature that Mesopotamian civilization perhaps reached its greatest heights, and nowhere is this more evident than in humanity's first great epic, the story of Gilgamesh. Picture a storyteller in the court of some Mesopotamian king, perhaps around 1800 BCE, firelight flickering on clay tablets as he recites the adventures of Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk. 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, Gilgamesh begins as a tyrant, oppressing his people until the gods create Enkidu, a wild man from the forests, to challenge him. What follows is a story of friendship, adventure, loss, and the search for meaning that speaks to us across 4,000 years. Gilgamesh and Enkidu become friends, then battle companions, facing monsters and gods in adventures that take them to the ends of the earth. But when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is forced to confront his own mortality, leading him on a quest for immortality that ultimately teaches him to find meaning in the brief span of human life. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just literature, it's philosophy, psychology, theology. It grapples with questions that still haunt us today. What is the meaning of life? How do we face death? What legacy do we leave behind? How do we find purpose in a universe that seems indifferent to our struggles? These ancient Mesopotamians, living in mud-brick cities beside unpredictable rivers, surrounded by desert and mountain, somehow managed to create art and literature of enduring beauty and wisdom. They looked at the human condition with clear eyes, accepting both its grandeur and its limitations. But the golden age of Sumerian civilization was not to last. Around 1750 BCE, a new power was rising in central Mesopotamia, the city of Babylon, under its remarkable king Hammurabi. We've already spoken of Hammurabi's legal innovations, but his achievements went far beyond law. Under his rule, Babylon became the greatest city in the world, a center of learning and culture that would influence the entire region for centuries to come. Hammurabi was a master of both war and diplomacy. He conquered through a combination of military skill and political cunning, forming alliances with distant powers, playing enemies against each other, striking at precisely the right moment to achieve maximum advantage with minimum bloodshed. But perhaps his greatest achievement was creating a truly unified Mesopotamian state for the first time since Sargon, bringing together Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, and dozens of other ethnic groups under a single government that respected their diversity while creating common institutions, laws, and cultural practices. Under Hammurabi and his successors, Babylon became synonymous with civilization itself, the place where scholars from across the known world came to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law. The Babylonian mathematical system was so sophisticated that some of their calculations weren't surpassed until the Renaissance. They were the first to predict eclipses accurately, to map the movements of planets, to understand that mathematics could be used to model natural phenomena. Their astronomical observations were so precise that modern scientists still consult Babylonian records when studying ancient celestial events. But perhaps most remarkably, the Babylonians were the first to develop what we might recognize as scientific method, the idea that natural phenomena follow regular laws that can be discovered through careful observation and logical reasoning. As we reach the middle of our journey through Mesopotamian history, if you're finding these ancient stories as fascinating as we do, we'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. Your subscription helps us continue exploring these forgotten chapters of human history, bringing ancient voices back to life for modern ears. The Babylonian Empire reached its zenith under Hammurabi's successors, but like all empires, it eventually faced challenges that would test its strength: invasions from the Hittites, internal rebellions, the gradual shift of trade routes to other regions. For several centuries, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of competing kingdoms and city-states: the Assyrians in the north, various Babylonian dynasties in the south, Elamites from the east, nomadic tribes from the west and south. It was a period of constant warfare, political instability, and cultural fragmentation. But from this chaos would emerge perhaps the most formidable military power the ancient world had ever seen: the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Picture the court of Tiglath-Pileser III, around 740 BCE, the king receiving reports from his generals, his spies, his diplomats scattered across the known world. Before him, maps drawn on clay tablets show an empire that stretches from Egypt to Iran, from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. This is power on a scale that even Sargon might have envied, and it was built through innovations in military technology, administrative organization, and psychological warfare that would influence empire building for centuries to come. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they perfected conquest. Their armies were the first to make extensive use of iron weapons, cavalry, siege engines. They built roads to move troops quickly across vast distances, established supply depots and communication networks that allowed them to coordinate military operations across thousands of miles. But perhaps their most effective innovation was their policy of deliberate terror. They cultivated a reputation for such brutality toward those who resisted that many cities surrendered without a fight, rather than face Assyrian vengeance. It was psychological warfare raised to an art form. Yet the Assyrians were more than just conquerors. They were also builders, administrators, patrons of art and learning. The great library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh contained over 30,000 cuneiform tablets, the largest collection of written knowledge in the ancient world. When archaeologists discovered this library in the 19th century, they found literary treasures that had been lost for over 2 millennia. Under kings like Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian Empire became a truly cosmopolitan civilization. Aramaic became the lingua franca of trade and diplomacy, connecting cultures from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Art and architecture reached new heights of sophistication, combining influences from across the empire into distinctly Assyrian styles. The royal palaces at Nimrud, Khorsabad, and Nineveh were wonders of their age, vast complexes decorated with intricate relief sculptures that told the stories of royal hunts, military campaigns, religious ceremonies. These weren't just propaganda, they were sophisticated works of art that captured the energy, power, and confidence of a civilization at its peak. But empires built on force alone are inherently unstable, and by 650 BCE, the Assyrian Empire was showing signs of strain. Constant warfare had drained the treasury, rebellions were becoming more frequent, and new powers were rising on the empire's borders. The end came suddenly in 612 BCE. A coalition of Babylonians and Medes besieged and destroyed Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. Within a few years, the greatest empire the world had yet seen simply vanished. The speed of its collapse shocked the ancient world, proving once again that even the mightiest powers are subject to the turning of time's wheel. From the ashes of Assyrian power rose a new Babylonian empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire under kings like Nabopolassar and his famous son Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar. Even his name carries the weight of legend. Here was a king who didn't just rule an empire, he built wonders. Under his reign from 605 to 562 BCE, Babylon became the most magnificent city the world had ever seen, a center of learning, trade, and architectural achievement that inspired awe and envy throughout the known world. Imagine approaching Babylon during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The massive walls, so wide that 2 chariots could pass on top, the great Ishtar Gate, decorated with brilliant blue-glazed bricks and golden images of dragons and bulls, the processional way leading to the towering ziggurat that the Greeks would call the Tower of Babel. But Nebuchadnezzar's greatest achievement, his gift to posterity, was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, these gardens were said to rise in terraces high above the city, watered by ingenious mechanical systems that lifted water from the Euphrates to create an artificial paradise in the desert. The gardens were supposedly built for Nebuchadnezzar's wife Amytis of Media, who missed the green hills and fragrant gardens of her homeland, a monument to love that combined Mesopotamian engineering genius with an aesthetic vision that captured the imagination of the ancient world. Whether the Hanging Gardens actually existed as described, or whether they were a later legend that grew from fragments of half-remembered history, we may never know for certain, but the very fact that such a story could be believed, could inspire generations of artists and poets, tells us something profound about the achievements of Mesopotamian civilization at its height. This was a culture that had learned to transform the harsh realities of life in an unforgiving landscape into beauty, order, meaning, that could create gardens in the desert, build mountains from mud brick, capture the movements of the stars in mathematical formulae. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was the culmination of 3 millennia of Mesopotamian achievement, a city where scholars from across the known world came to study, where merchants from India and Africa and Europe met to trade goods and ideas, where artists and craftsmen created works of beauty that would inspire admiration for centuries to come. But even as Babylon reached its zenith, forces were gathering that would bring the age of Mesopotamian independence to a close. From the east came the Persians under Cyrus the Great, a new kind of conqueror who offered not destruction but integration, not oppression but respect for local customs and traditions. In 539 BCE, Cyrus entered Babylon not as a destroyer but as a liberator, and Mesopotamia became a province of the vast Persian Empire. Under Persian rule, Mesopotamian cities continued to prosper, trade flourished, scholarship continued, the great temples and ziggurats were maintained and restored. But the age of Mesopotamian political independence was over. Never again would these ancient cities rule their own destinies. The Persians were followed by Alexander the Great, who died in Babylon in 323 BCE while planning new conquests. Then came the Seleucids, the Parthians, the Sassanids, each ruling power adding new layers to the complex cultural heritage of the region. but none quite recapturing the creative energy of the classical Mesopotamian period. But let's not rush to the ending just yet. There's so much more to discover in this ancient world. Let's step back and explore the daily life of these remarkable people, the merchants and farmers, the priests and scribes, the craftsmen and soldiers who built this first civilization with their own hands. Picture a typical morning in Earth, around 2000 BCE, the sun rising over the massive ziggurat, its shadows slowly retreating across the narrow streets packed with mud brick houses. The air fills with the sounds of a city awakening, donkeys braying as merchants load their caravans, children's voices echoing from courtyards, the rhythmic pounding of metalworkers already at their forges. In the scribal quarter, young students sit cross-legged in the shade of their master's house, practicing their cuneiform on practice tablets, making the same mistakes, learning the same lessons that students would learn for thousands of years to come. The scribal art is the mother of eloquence, the father of artists, their teacher tells them, just as teachers had told students in this same spot for generations. These weren't just children learning to read and write. They were preparing to become the backbone of civilization itself. Scribes kept the records that made complex society possible, tracking harvests and taxes, recording laws and contracts, preserving the stories and songs that gave meaning to human life. The curriculum was remarkably sophisticated: mathematics and astronomy, literature and law, geography and theology. By the time they graduated, these young scribes could calculate compound interest, predict eclipses, recite hundreds of lines of epic poetry, draft legal contracts in multiple languages. But scribal school wasn't just about technical skills, it was about character formation. Students learnt the values that held Mesopotamian society together: respect for authority, dedication to truth, commitment to justice, reverence for the gods. They copied out moral texts that taught them how to live honorably. Do not return evil to the one who disputes with you. Requite with kindness your evildoer. Smile on your adversary. Meanwhile, in the temple complex, priests were performing the daily rituals that maintained the relationship between gods and humans, washing and clothing the divine statues, offering food and drink, burning incense and reciting prayers. This wasn't mere ceremony to the Mesopotamians. These rituals were essential for maintaining cosmic order, ensuring that the sun would rise, the rivers would flood, the crops would grow. The temple wasn't just a religious institution, it was an economic powerhouse, owning vast estates, employing hundreds of workers, engaging in trade and manufacturing on a scale that rivaled any modern corporation. The priests weren't just spiritual leaders, they were economists, administrators, diplomats, scholars. In the workshops attached to the temple, craftsmen created objects of breathtaking beauty: gold jewelry inlaid with lapis lazuli, cylinder seals carved with mythological scenes, statues of gods and goddesses that seemed almost alive in their expressive power. Take a moment to imagine holding one of these cylinder seals, a small stone cylinder, perhaps 2 inches long, carved with intricate designs that tell stories of gods and heroes. When rolled across wet clay, it would leave a continuous frieze, a signature more secure than any written name, a work of art that could fit in your palm. These seals weren't just tools. They were expressions of identity, status, belief. A merchant's seal might show him being presented to a god by his personal deity. A king's seal might depict him in battle against the forces of chaos. A priest's seal might show the sacred marriage that ensured fertility for the coming year. Every seal was unique, carved by master craftsmen who spent years perfecting their art, yet every seal participated in a common visual language that connected individual identity to cosmic meaning. Looking at Mesopotamian seals today, we're not just seeing ancient art, we're glimpsing a worldview where every human action, no matter how mundane, was understood to have cosmic significance. But let's venture beyond the cities, out into the countryside where the vast majority of Mesopotamians lived and worked. Here, in the fields and villages beside the ancient canals, the real foundations of civilization were laid, grain by grain, irrigation channel by irrigation channel, harvest by harvest. Mesopotamian agriculture was a marvel of engineering and organization, a complex system of canals, dikes, and reservoirs that transformed a harsh landscape into the most productive farmland in the ancient world. But this system required constant maintenance, careful coordination, shared sacrifice, qualities that helped shape the Mesopotamian character. Imagine a farmer named Enlil-bani, yes, we'll borrow the name from our scribe friend, working his fields outside Nippur, around 1800 BCE. His day begins before dawn, checking the irrigation channels that feed his barley and wheat fields, making sure the water flows evenly, that no neighbor is taking more than his fair share. This isn't just farming, it's hydraulic engineering on a scale that wouldn't be matched anywhere else in the world for thousands of years. Enlil-bani understands water flow, soil salinity, crop rotation, flood control, knowledge passed down through generations, refined through centuries of trial and error. But he also understands that his success depends on cooperation with his neighbors. The irrigation system only works if everyone contributes their labor to maintenance, follows the water allocation rules, respects the authority of the canal inspectors appointed by the temple or palace. When harvest time comes, Enlil-bani's grain doesn't just feed his family. A portion goes to the temple as religious offering, another portion to the palace as tax, another to pay the craftsmen who made his tools, the merchants who brought in materials he couldn't produce himself. His surplus grain might end up feeding scribes in Babylon, metal workers in Assur, even sailors on ships bound for the Indus Valley, part of a vast economic network that connected Mesopotamia to the wider world. And in the evening, after the work is done, Enlil-bani might sit in his courtyard, listening to travelling storytellers recite the adventures of Gilgamesh, or the myths of creation, or the latest news from distant cities, participating in a cultural conversation that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. This was the genius of Mesopotamian civilization. It created systems that allowed millions of individual farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and scholars to cooperate in enterprises far beyond what any of them could accomplish alone. Not through coercion primarily, though that certainly existed, but through shared culture, common values, mutual benefit. Let's travel now to the great trading centers, to Mari on the Euphrates, where merchants from across the known world gathered to exchange goods, ideas, and stories. In the archives of Mari's palace, archaeologists have found over 20,000 cuneiform tablets, diplomatic correspondence, trade agreements, intelligence reports, personal letters that give us an intimate view of Bronze Age international relations. These weren't primitive societies engaged in simple barter. These were sophisticated states with professional diplomats, commercial law, international treaties, trade regulations. A merchant from Kanesh could travel to Babylon with confidence that his contracts would be honored, his property protected, his disputes settled according to recognized legal principles. The scale of this ancient trade network was staggering. Mesopotamian textiles reached the Indus Valley, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan adorned Sumerian temples, cedar wood from Lebanon built palaces in Babylon, tin from Central Asia made possible the Bronze Age revolution. But they weren't just trading goods, they were trading ideas. Mathematical concepts developed in Babylon spread to Egypt and India. Astronomical observations made in Mesopotamia influenced Greek science. Literary themes first explored in Sumerian poetry appeared in cultures from Anatolia to Persia. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, wasn't just a Mesopotamian story. Versions of it appeared throughout the ancient Near East, each culture adapting it to their own values and concerns. The flood story that appears in Genesis has clear parallels in much older Mesopotamian literature, not because one copied from the other, but because both drew from a common pool of ancient traditions. This cultural exchange wasn't always peaceful. Armies marched along the same routes as merchant caravans, and conquest often followed trade. But even warfare in the ancient Near East had its rules, its customs, its diplomatic protocols. When Sargon of Akkad conquered the Sumerian cities, he didn't destroy their culture, he adopted their writing system, their religious practices, their administrative methods. When Hammurabi unified Mesopotamia, he incorporated legal traditions from all the peoples he ruled, creating a synthesis that was greater than any of its component parts. This pattern would repeat throughout Mesopotamian history, conquerors who became pupils of the civilizations they conquered, adopting and adapting rather than simply destroying. It's why Mesopotamian cultural influence spread so far beyond its political boundaries, why cuneiform writing was used for over 3,000 years, Why Mesopotamian mathematics and astronomy influenced civilizations that had never seen the Tigris or Euphrates. But perhaps nowhere was Mesopotamian genius more evident than in their approach to the divine, their sophisticated theology that grappled with questions that still challenge us today. The Mesopotamian pantheon wasn't just a collection of powerful beings demanding worship, it was a complex system for understanding the forces that shape human life. Each god represented not just natural phenomena, but aspects of human experience. Enlil, the storm god, embodied both the creative and destructive power of wind and weather. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, represented the passionate forces that drive both creation and destruction in human life. These gods weren't distant, perfect beings. They were recognizably human in their emotions and motivations, struggling with the same conflicts and contradictions that humans face. The myths weren't just entertainment. They were philosophy, psychology, theology, wrapped in memorable stories that helped people understand their place in a complex and often confusing universe. Take the myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld, a story of death and rebirth that explores themes of sacrifice, transformation, and renewal. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, decides to visit the underworld ruled by her sister Ereshkigal, but the underworld has its own laws, and even goddesses must submit to them. Stripped of her powers and killed, Inanna's death threatens the fertility of the earth. Crops wither, animals refuse to mate, life itself begins to fail. Only through the intervention of other gods and the sacrifice of her consort Dumuzi can she be restored to life, but the price is eternal. For half of each year, Dumuzi must take her place in the realm of the dead. This isn't just mythology, it's a profound meditation on the cycles of life and death, the necessary sacrifices that renewal requires, the interconnectedness of all existence. The story acknowledges that life includes death, that creation requires destruction, that joy and sorrow are inseparable aspects of the human condition. Mesopotamian religion didn't promise easy answers or simple comfort. It demanded that people face the full complexity of existence with courage, wisdom, and humility. The gods themselves struggled with moral choices, made mistakes, faced consequences for their actions, providing models not of perfection, but of how to live with dignity in an imperfect world. This theological sophistication is reflected in Mesopotamian literature, which grappled with moral and philosophical questions with a depth that still impresses modern readers. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just an adventure story, it's an exploration of friendship, mortality, the search for meaning, the acceptance of human limitation. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh's grief drives him to seek immortality, but his quest ultimately teaches him that meaning comes not from avoiding death, but from accepting it while still striving to leave something valuable behind. The life that you are seeking, you will never find, he's told. When the gods created mankind, death for mankind they set aside, life in their own hands retaining. But this isn't a counsel of despair. It's an invitation to find meaning within the bounds of mortal existence. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, not with immortality, but with wisdom, understanding that his legacy lies in the city he built, the people he served, the story that will outlive his physical existence. This acceptance of limitation, combined with determination to achieve greatness within those limits, was perhaps the defining characteristic of Mesopotamian civilization. They built for eternity, while accepting that nothing lasts forever, created beauty while acknowledging that all beauty fades, pursued truth while recognizing that complete understanding remains beyond human reach. If you're still with us on this journey through the cradle of civilization, and we hope you are, we'd be grateful if you could hit that like button. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these ancient stories to life, one forgotten voice at a time. Now let's explore one of the most fascinating aspects of Mesopotamian civilization, their scientific achievements, which laid the foundations for much of what we still consider advanced knowledge. The Mesopotamians were the world's first true astronomers, not just observers of the sky, but mathematical analyzers of celestial patterns. By 1500 BCE, Babylonian astronomers were making predictions that were accurate to within minutes. They could predict eclipses decades in advance, track the movements of planets with extraordinary precision, calculate the length of the year to within 26 minutes of the correct value. Picture the astronomer priests on top of the great ziggurat at Babylon, night after night, year after year, carefully recording the positions of stars and planets, not just for curiosity, but because they understood that the heavens followed mathematical laws that could be discovered, understood, used for prediction. Their astronomical diaries, daily records of celestial observations, contain some of the most accurate scientific data from the ancient world. Modern astronomers still consult Babylonian records when studying historical astronomical events. The observations are that precise. But Mesopotamian astronomy wasn't just about mapping the heavens. It was about understanding time itself. They created the first accurate calendars, dividing the year into 12 months, the month into weeks, the day into hours. They recognized that the solar year and lunar month don't align perfectly, and developed sophisticated methods for keeping their calendar synchronized with the seasons. Their mathematical achievements were equally impressive. They developed positional notation, understood the concept of zero centuries before it appeared in India, solved quadratic equations, calculated square roots and cube roots to remarkable accuracy. Mesopotamian mathematics wasn't just theoretical, it was intensely practical, developed to solve real-world problems. How much grain can be stored in a cylindrical silo? How many bricks are needed to build a wall of given dimensions? How should fields be divided fairly among heirs? How much interest accumulates on a loan? Their mathematical texts read like modern textbooks, step-by-step solutions to practical problems, general methods that can be applied to similar situations, even what we would recognize as algebraic notation. But perhaps their most remarkable achievement was recognizing that mathematics could be used to understand natural phenomena, that abstract numerical relationships could describe real physical processes. This insight, that the universe operates according to mathematical laws, was revolutionary, and it fundamentally shaped all subsequent scientific development. Mesopotamian medicine was equally sophisticated. They had detailed knowledge of anatomy and physiology, performed complex surgical procedures, developed an extensive pharmacology using hundreds of different plants, minerals, and animal products. Their medical texts distinguish between symptoms and causes, describe treatments for specific conditions, even include what we would recognize as clinical case studies, detailed records of individual patients and their treatments. But Mesopotamian medicine also incorporated spiritual and psychological elements. They understood that illness often has emotional or spiritual dimensions, that healing requires attention to the whole person, not just the physical symptoms. Their approach to mental illness was remarkably humane for its time. They recognized that what we would call depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions were real illnesses requiring treatment, not moral failings deserving punishment. In engineering, the Mesopotamians were master builders. They developed techniques for constructing massive buildings without mortar, created the first true arches and domes, built irrigation systems that remained functional for thousands of years. The Great Ziggurat at Babylon, the Tower of Babel of biblical tradition, was an engineering marvel that rose nearly 300 feet above the city, built entirely of mud brick, yet stable enough to survive for over a millennium. Their city planning was equally impressive, straight streets laid out in grid patterns, sophisticated sewage systems, building codes that ensured structural safety and fire prevention. The city of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar was probably the most advanced urban environment anywhere in the world. But perhaps their most important innovation was the development of empirical method, the idea that knowledge comes from careful observation, systematic experimentation, logical analysis of evidence. Mesopotamian scholars didn't just accept traditional explanations, they tested them against observation, modified them when evidence contradicted theory, developed new explanations when old ones proved inadequate. This empirical approach is evident in their astronomical records, their mathematical problem-solving, their medical case studies, their engineering solutions. They were, in many ways, the world's first scientists, developing methods of inquiry that wouldn't be systematically applied in other cultures for thousands of years. All of this scientific and technological achievement was made possible by something even more fundamental, the invention of writing, which allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations. Before writing, human knowledge was limited by memory. When the person who knew something died, that knowledge died with them. Writing changed everything. It made possible the systematic accumulation of knowledge, the comparison of different theories and observations, the development of increasingly sophisticated explanations for natural phenomena. The scribal schools of Mesopotamia weren't just training clerks, they were creating the world's first scientific community, a group of educated individuals who could build on each other's work, challenge each other's ideas, collaborate on projects that no single person could complete. This intellectual environment, competitive but collaborative, traditional but innovative, practical but theoretical, created the conditions that made Mesopotamian scientific achievement possible. But we shouldn't idealize Mesopotamian civilization. For all its achievements, it was also a society built on inequality, exploitation, warfare. Slaves provided much of the labor that made prosperity possible. Women, despite some notable exceptions, had limited rights and opportunities. Warfare was constant, brutal, often devastating for the conquered. The great irrigation systems that made agriculture possible also made possible unprecedented environmental destruction. Soil salinization from intensive irrigation eventually rendered vast areas uninhabitable, contributing to the eventual decline of Mesopotamian civilization. The same organizational skills that created magnificent cities also created efficient military machines capable of unprecedented destruction. The Assyrians, in particular, perfected techniques of siege warfare, psychological terror, and systematic deportation that left their enemies devastated for generations. Mesopotamian law, for all its sophistication, still enshrined class distinctions that seem barbaric to modern sensibilities. Punishments varied according to the social status of both perpetrator and victim. Slaves had few legal protections. Women's rights were severely limited. Yet even acknowledging these limitations, the achievements remain extraordinary. They created, from nothing but human ingenuity and determination, the basic institutions and technologies that still shape our world today. Writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, literature, urban planning, international trade, professional military organization, systematic education, empirical science, all of these fundamental aspects of human civilization were either invented or perfected in ancient Mesopotamia. And gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the great cities began to decline. Climate change played a role. The region became drier, the rivers less reliable. Political instability disrupted trade routes. Merchants found safer, more profitable paths for their caravans. New technologies, parchment and paper, made clay tablets seem old-fashioned. New cities, Alexandria, Constantinople, Baghdad, drew away talent and resources. Most crucially, perhaps, the ancient irrigation systems that had sustained Mesopotamian agriculture for millennia began to fail. Canals silted up, embankments collapsed. The delicate balance between rivers and farmland that had supported millions of people slowly unraveled. The decline wasn't sudden, it stretched across centuries, with periods of revival alternating with periods of decay. The Persian conquest in 539 BCE marked the end of Mesopotamian political independence, but Persian rule was generally benevolent. They respected local traditions, maintained the temples, continued to support scholarship and the arts. Alexander's conquest in 331 BCE brought Greek influence to the region, but also continued respect for Mesopotamian traditions. Alexander himself was fascinated by Babylonian astronomy and mathematics. He consulted Babylonian astronomers about auspicious dates for his campaigns, supported the restoration of temples and schools. Under the Seleucid dynasty, Mesopotamian cities continued to prosper. Babylon remained a major center of learning. Seleucia on Tigris became one of the largest cities in the world. Trade routes continued to bring wealth and cultural exchange. But gradually, the balance was shifting. New cities, new trade routes, new centers of power were emerging. Alexandria in Egypt became the new center of learning. Constantinople became the new center of trade. Damascus, and then Baghdad, became the new centers of political power. The old Mesopotamian cities didn't die suddenly. They slowly lost their vitality, their populations, their economic importance. By 2000 CE, many of the great Sumerian and Babylonian cities were already mostly ruins. Their inhabitants had moved to newer, more prosperous centers. The rise of Christianity brought new challenges. The old temples were abandoned or converted. The priestly schools that had preserved Mesopotamian learning for millennia were closed or transformed. The cuneiform writing system was gradually replaced by alphabetic scripts. By 600 CE, many of the great Mesopotamian cities were already ruins, their populations scattered, their temples abandoned, their libraries dissolved into dust. The rise of Islam and the founding of Baghdad brought new life to the region, but this was a different civilization, one that looked west to Mecca and Damascus, rather than drawing its inspiration from the ancient traditions of Sumer and Babylon. The final blow came with the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. In 1258, Hulagu Khan's armies destroyed Baghdad's irrigation system so thoroughly that vast areas of central Iraq became desert that remains uninhabitable to this day. And so the great age of Mesopotamian civilization came to an end, not with a dramatic collapse like the fall of Assyria, but with a slow fade, like a magnificent tapestry gradually losing its colors until only the faintest patterns remain visible to the careful eye. For over a millennium, the achievements of ancient Mesopotamia were almost completely forgotten, surviving only in fragments of biblical tradition, in half-remembered stories told by Arab historians, in the accounts of classical authors who had visited the region when it was already in decline. The great cities became artificial hills created by centuries of mud brick construction collapsing and being built over again. Farmers ploughed fields where Sargon's armies had marched, where Hammurabi had held court, where the priests of Marduk had performed their ancient rituals. Bedouin tribes pitched their tents over the ruins of Babylon, their campfires casting flickering shadows over walls that had once enclosed the hanging gardens, their flocks grazing in fields where Nebuchadnezzar's architects had planned wonders that challenged the heavens themselves. It wasn't until the 19th century that European archaeologists, armed with the new tools of scientific excavation and the growing ability to read cuneiform, began to uncover the buried treasures of Mesopotamian civilization. The rediscovery began, appropriately enough, with the stories. European scholars had long been fascinated by biblical references to Babylon and Nineveh, but these seemed like mythical places, no more real than Atlantis or El Dorado. Then, in 1843, Paul M. Botta began excavating at Khorsabad in northern Iraq and found the palace of Sargon II, complete with massive stone reliefs depicting the Assyrian king's military campaigns. Suddenly, the Assyrians weren't just biblical villains, they were real people who had left detailed records of their lives and achievements. Henry Layard's excavations at Nimrud and Nineveh followed, revealing the magnificent palaces of Ashur-Nasirpal and Sennacherib, walls covered with detailed sculptures showing royal hunts, religious ceremonies, military campaigns. These weren't just archaeological finds, they were works of art that revealed a sophisticated civilization with its own aesthetic values, its own understanding of beauty and meaning. But the greatest discovery came in 1853, when Hormuzd-Rassam, working under Layard's direction, uncovered the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, over 30,000 cuneiform tablets covering every aspect of Mesopotamian knowledge. Here were mathematical texts that solved problems using techniques not rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance, astronomical observations more accurate than anything achieved in the classical world, medical treatises that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of anatomy and disease, literary works that revealed the emotional and spiritual depths of ancient human experience. And most remarkably of all, here was the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest known work of literature, telling a story of friendship and loss and the search for meaning that spoke across millennia to modern hearts. The decipherment of cuneiform was like recovering a lost language of humanity itself. Suddenly, thousands of years of human thought and experience became accessible again. Shopping lists and love letters, royal proclamations and private prayers, mathematical calculations and mythological epics, the full range of human experience in all its complexity and contradictory beauty. Names that had survived only in biblical tradition, Babylon, Nineveh, Ur, suddenly became real places again, with streets and houses and temples that could be walked through, artifacts that could be held, documents that could be read. George Smith's translation of the flood story from the Epic of Gilgamesh in 1872 caused a sensation. Here was a story clearly related to the biblical account of Noah, but older by at least 1,000 years. Suddenly, scholars realized that the Bible itself was part of a much larger tradition of ancient Near Eastern literature. As more tablets were translated, the full scope of Mesopotamian achievement became clear. These weren't primitive societies stumbling towards civilization. but sophisticated cultures that had solved fundamental problems of human organization, developed advanced sciences and technologies, created art and literature of enduring beauty and meaning. The archaeological discoveries continued throughout the 20th century. Leonard Woolley's excavations at Wallow revealed the magnificent royal tombs of the early dynastic period, with their gold and lapis lazuli treasures that demonstrated the incredible wealth and artistic sophistication of Sumerian civilization. The discovery of the archives at Kanesh revealed the extensive trade networks that connected Mesopotamia to the wider world. Thousands of business letters and contracts that showed how Bronze Age merchants operated across vast distances with confidence and sophistication. Excavations at Mari Ebla and other sites continued to reveal new aspects of Mesopotamian civilization. Diplomatic correspondence that showed the complex international relations of the Bronze Age, literary texts that preserved additional myths and stories, economic records that demonstrated the incredible organizational complexity of ancient urban societies. Each new discovery added depth and complexity to our understanding of Mesopotamian civilization, revealing it not as a simple, primitive society, but as a multifaceted culture that grappled with the same fundamental questions that challenge us today. How do we create just societies? How do we balance individual freedom with collective responsibility? How do we find meaning in the face of mortality? How do we understand our place in the cosmos? How do we preserve knowledge for future generations? The Mesopotamians didn't have all the answers, but they asked the right questions, and they developed approaches to these challenges that continue to influence us today. As we near the end of our journey through Mesopotamian history, we'd love it if you'd consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten chapters of human experience back to life, one ancient mystery at a time. What strikes us most powerfully about the Mesopotamians, what makes their story so relevant to our own time, is how thoroughly human they were. They faced the same fundamental challenges we face: how to live together in large communities, how to manage resources fairly, how to balance individual freedom with collective needs, how to find meaning in the face of uncertainty and mortality. Their solutions weren't always perfect, but they were often remarkably sophisticated, showing a deep understanding of human nature and social dynamics that we're still learning from today. Take their approach to law, for instance. Hammurabi's code wasn't just a list of punishments, but a comprehensive attempt to create a just society that balanced competing interests and provided protection for the vulnerable. The principle of proportional justice, that punishment should fit the crime, remains central to legal systems around the world. Or consider their economic innovations. They developed the first banking systems, the first standardized currencies, the first commercial law codes. The business practices documented in Mesopotamian archives, partnership agreements, insurance contracts, credit arrangements, wouldn't be out of place in a modern commercial environment. In science and mathematics, their achievements were foundational. The base 60 number system they developed for astronomical calculations is still used today. Their observations of planetary movements were so accurate that astronomers still consult Babylonian records when studying celestial mechanics. Most profoundly, perhaps, they gave us the concept of recorded history itself, the idea that human experience could be preserved in writing for future generations to learn from. Before the Mesopotamians, human knowledge died with the people who possessed it. After them, wisdom could accumulate across centuries, each generation building on the achievements of those who came before. But perhaps their greatest gift to us was something less tangible but equally important: the demonstration that civilization is possible, that humans can rise above mere survival to create beauty, meaning, order, that we can build societies that nurture art, literature, science, philosophy, that we can reach toward ideals of justice, truth, and transcendence, even while remaining firmly grounded in the practical realities of daily life. The Mesopotamians showed us that civilization isn't automatic. It requires constant effort, careful attention, willingness to adapt and change. They also showed us that civilizations are fragile, that even the greatest achievements can be lost if they're not carefully preserved and continually renewed. As we look around our own world today, with its global trade networks and instant communication, its vast cities and complex technologies, we might feel very different from those ancient farmers and merchants beside the Tigris and Euphrates. But in fundamental ways, we're facing the same challenges they faced: how to manage limited resources, how to balance competing interests, how to maintain stability in a changing world, how to preserve what's valuable from the past while adapting to new realities. The rise and fall of Mesopotamian civilization offers no easy answers to these challenges, but it does offer something perhaps more valuable: perspective. The long view of human experience that reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, that change is constant, that adaptation is essential for survival. It also offers hope, the example of people who faced enormous challenges with courage, creativity, and determination, who built something beautiful and lasting from the most unpromising materials, who left us gifts of knowledge and wisdom that continue to enrich human life thousands of years after their cities crumbled into dust. Walking through the galleries of the British Museum or the Metropolitan Museum, looking at Mesopotamian artifacts, cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, relief sculptures, golden jewelry, we're not just seeing ancient objects, we're connecting with the hopes, dreams, fears, and aspirations of people who lived and loved and struggled and achieved in the dawn of human civilization. These weren't primitive people fumbling toward enlightenment. They were our intellectual equals, working with the tools available to them to solve problems that remain challenging today. In many ways, they were our pioneers, exploring the possibilities of human organization and achievement in ways that made our own civilization possible. The story of Mesopotamia is ultimately the story of human potential, of what we can accomplish when we work together, when we're willing to innovate and experiment, when we refuse to accept that things must remain as they've always been. It's also a story of human limitation, of the ways that even the greatest achievements can be undermined by short-sightedness, by the failure to adapt to changing circumstances, by the eternal human tendency toward conflict and competition. But perhaps most importantly, it's a story of continuity, of how human creativity and wisdom can survive even the collapse of the civilizations that first nurtured them. The ideas developed in ancient Mesopotamia, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, literature, didn't die with the cities that created them. They spread throughout the world, adapted and developed by new cultures, becoming part of the common heritage of humanity. In that sense, Mesopotamian civilization never really ended. It transformed, evolved, became part of something larger. The cuneiform tablets may have given way to papyrus scrolls and printed books and digital files, but the essential human impulse to record and preserve knowledge continues. The ziggurats may have crumbled, but the human desire to reach towards something greater than ourselves, to create monuments that outlast our individual lives, remains as strong as ever. The great kings and queens of Mesopotamia may be dust, but their example of leadership, both positive and negative, continues to inform our understanding of power and responsibility. As our journey through the rise and fall of the world's first civilization draws to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate what the Mesopotamians achieved in their 5,000 years of recorded history. They gave us writing, the technology that makes all other technologies possible, that allows knowledge to accumulate across generations. They gave us the city, the dense concentration of human activity that makes specialization possible, that allows some people to devote their entire lives to art or science or philosophy or governance. They gave us law, the idea that society should operate according to principles rather than mere power, that justice should be predictable and proportional. They gave us mathematics, the tools for understanding quantity, space, time, for modeling the natural world in ways that allow prediction and control. They gave us astronomy, the recognition that the heavens operate according to discoverable laws, that mathematics can describe the movements of celestial bodies. They gave us literature, stories that explore the depths of human experience, that help us understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. They gave us the idea of empire, of political organization on a scale that transcends tribal and ethnic boundaries, that creates space for diverse cultures to interact and learn from each other. Most fundamentally, they gave us the concept of progress, the idea that human life can be improved through knowledge, effort, and cooperation, that we're not condemned to endless repetition of the past, but can create something better for our children. These gifts didn't come without cost. Mesopotamian civilization was built on slavery, warfare, environmental exploitation. Like all human achievements, it was a mixture of light and shadow, progress and regression, wisdom and folly. But the balance, we think, is clearly positive. The innovations and insights developed in ancient Mesopotamia created possibilities for human flourishing that continue to enrich our lives today. As we close this exploration of humanity's first great civilization, we're struck by how relevant their story remains. In our own time of rapid change, global connectivity, and environmental challenge, the Mesopotamian experience offers both inspiration and warning. It reminds us that human civilization is not inevitable, that it requires constant effort to maintain, constant adaptation to survive. It shows us that even the greatest powers can fall if they fail to respond to changing circumstances. But it also demonstrates the incredible resilience of human creativity, the way that ideas and innovations can survive the collapse of the societies that created them, spreading and evolving to become part of humanity's common heritage. The Mesopotamians built the first civilization, but in a very real sense, we're all still living in the world they created. Every time we write a letter, follow a law, solve a mathematical problem, look up at the stars and wonder about our place in the cosmos, we're drawing on insights first developed in the cities beside the Tigris and Euphrates. Their story is our story, the ongoing human adventure of learning to live together, to build meaning from chaos, to create beauty from the raw materials of existence. And that adventure continues, in laboratories and classrooms, in cities and villages, in the dreams and efforts of people around the world who are still trying to answer the fundamental questions the Mesopotamians first posed. How shall we live? What shall we build? What legacy shall we leave for those who come after us? The rivers still flow. The Tigris and Euphrates still carry their ancient waters from the mountains to the sea. But the civilization they once nurtured lives on in ways its creators could never have imagined. In the global network of knowledge and culture that connects all humanity in a single, ever-expanding conversation about the meaning and possibility of human life. Before we say goodbye, we'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. Your support helps us continue these journeys through the forgotten corners of human history, bringing ancient voices back to life for modern ears. The Mesopotamians are gone, but their gifts remain. Their cities have crumbled, but their ideas still shape our world. Their empires have fallen, but their example of human creativity and achievement continues to inspire. In the end, perhaps that's the most important lesson of Mesopotamian civilization, that what we create, the knowledge we preserve, the beauty we add to the world, these things can outlast any individual life, any particular society, any specific age. The first civilization fell, but civilization itself survived, grew, spread, became the common inheritance of all humanity. And in that continuation, that transformation, that eternal human refusal to let knowledge and beauty die, the ancient Mesopotamians achieved a kind of immortality that even Gilgamesh might have envied. The story ends, but the conversation continues. The tablets crumble, but the words survive. The empires fall, but the human spirit endures, still reaching toward the light, still building, still dreaming, still writing the next chapter in the endless story of human becoming. From all of us here at Simply About Earth, thank you for joining us on this journey through the cradle of civilization. Until next time, keep wondering, keep exploring, keep listening for the whispers of the past that still echo in the present moment. The rivers flow on, and so do we. For over a millennium, the achievements of ancient Mesopotamia were almost completely forgotten, surviving only in fragments of biblical tradition, in half-remembered stories told by Arab historians, in the accounts of classical authors who had visited the region when it was already in decline. The great cities became tells, artificial hills created by centuries of mud brick construction, collapsing and being built over again. Farmers ploughed fields where Sargon's armies had marched, where Hammurabi had held court, where the priests of Marduk had performed their ancient rituals. It wasn't until the 19th century that European archaeologists, armed with the new tools of scientific excavation and the growing ability to read cuneiform, began to uncover the buried treasures of Mesopotamian civilization. Names that had survived only in biblical tradition, Babylon, Nineveh, Ur, suddenly became real places again, with streets and houses and temples that could be walked through, artifacts that could be held, documents that could be read. The decipherment of cuneiform was like recovering a lost language of humanity itself. Suddenly, thousands of years of human thought and experience became accessible again. Shopping lists and love letters, royal proclamations and private prayers, mathematical calculations and mythological epics, the full range of human experience in all its complexity and contradictory beauty. As we near the end of our journey through Mesopotamian history, we'd love it if you'd consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten chapters of human experience back to life, one ancient mystery at a time. What strikes us most powerfully about the Mesopotamians, what makes their story so relevant to our own time, is how thoroughly human they were. They faced the same fundamental challenges we face: how to live together in large communities, how to manage resources fairly, how to balance individual freedom with collective needs, how to find meaning in the face of uncertainty and mortality. Their solutions weren't always perfect, but they were often remarkably sophisticated, showing a deep understanding of human nature and social dynamics that we're still learning from today. Take their approach to law, for instance. Hammurabi's code wasn't just a list of punishments, but a comprehensive attempt to create a just society that balanced competing interests and provided protection for the vulnerable. The principle of proportional justice, that punishment should fit the crime, remains central to legal systems around the world. Or consider their economic innovations. They developed the first banking systems, the first standardized currencies, the first commercial law codes. The business practices documented in Mesopotamian archives, partnership agreements, insurance contracts, credit arrangements, wouldn't be out of place in a modern commercial environment. In science and mathematics, their achievements were foundational. The base 60 number system they developed for astronomical calculations is still used today. Their observations of planetary movements were so accurate that astronomers still consult Babylonian records when studying celestial mechanics. Most profoundly, perhaps, they gave us the concept of recorded history itself, the idea that human experience could be preserved in writing for future generations to learn from. Before the Mesopotamians, human knowledge died with the people who possessed it. After them, wisdom could accumulate across centuries, each generation building on the achievements of those who came before. But perhaps their greatest gift to us was something less tangible but equally important: the demonstration that civilization is possible, that humans can rise above mere survival to create beauty, meaning, order, that we can build societies that nurture art, literature, science, philosophy, that we can reach toward ideals of justice, truth, and transcendence, even while remaining firmly grounded in the practical realities of daily life. The Mesopotamians showed us that civilization isn't automatic. It requires constant effort, careful attention, willingness to adapt and change. They also showed us that civilizations are fragile, that even the greatest achievements can be lost if they're not carefully preserved and continually renewed. As we look around our own world today, with its global trade networks and instant communication, its vast cities and complex technologies, we might feel very different from those ancient farmers and merchants beside the Tigris and Euphrates. But in fundamental ways, we're facing the same challenges they faced: how to manage limited resources, how to balance competing interests, how to maintain stability in a changing world, how to preserve what's valuable from the past while adapting to new realities. The rise and fall of Mesopotamian civilization offers no easy answers to these challenges, but it does offer something perhaps more valuable: perspective. The long view of human experience that reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, that change is constant, that adaptation is essential for survival. It also offers hope, the example of people who faced enormous challenges with courage, creativity, and determination, who built something beautiful and lasting from the most unpromising materials, who left us gifts of knowledge and wisdom that continue to enrich human life thousands of years after their cities crumbled into dust. Walking through the galleries of the British Museum or the Metropolitan Museum, looking at Mesopotamian artifacts, cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, relief sculptures, golden jewelry, we're not just seeing ancient objects, we're connecting with the hopes, dreams, fears, and aspirations of people who lived and loved and struggled and achieved in the dawn of human civilization. These weren't primitive people fumbling toward enlightenment. They were our intellectual equals, working with the tools available to them to solve problems that remain challenging today. In many ways, they were our pioneers, exploring the possibilities of human organization and achievement in ways that made our own civilization possible. The story of Mesopotamia is ultimately the story of human potential, of what we can accomplish when we work together, when we're willing to innovate and experiment, when we refuse to accept that things must remain as they've always been. It's also a story of human limitation, of the ways that even the greatest achievements can be undermined by short-sightedness, by the failure to adapt to changing circumstances, by the eternal human tendency toward conflict and competition. But perhaps most importantly, it's a story of continuity, of how human creativity and wisdom can survive even the collapse of the civilizations that first nurtured them. The ideas developed in ancient Mesopotamia, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, literature, didn't die with the cities that created them. They spread throughout the world, adapted and developed by new cultures, becoming part of the common heritage of humanity. In that sense, Mesopotamian civilization never really ended. It transformed, evolved, became part of something larger. The cuneiform tablets may have given way to papyrus scrolls and printed books and digital files, but the essential human impulse to record and preserve knowledge continues. The ziggurats may have crumbled, but the human desire to reach towards something greater than ourselves, to create monuments that outlast our individual lives, remains as strong as ever. The great kings and queens of Mesopotamia may be dust, but their example of leadership, both positive and negative, continues to inform our understanding of power and responsibility. As our journey through the rise and fall of the world's first civilization draws to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate what the Mesopotamians achieved in their 5,000 years of recorded history. They gave us writing, the technology that makes all other technologies possible, that allows knowledge to accumulate across generations. They gave us the city, the dense concentration of human activity that makes specialization possible, that allows some people to devote their entire lives to art or science or philosophy or governance. They gave us law, the idea that society should operate according to principles rather than mere power, that justice should be predictable and proportional. They gave us mathematics, the tools for understanding quantity, space, time, for modeling the natural world in ways that allow prediction and control. They gave us astronomy, the recognition that the heavens operate according to discoverable laws, that mathematics can describe the movements of celestial bodies. They gave us literature, stories that explore the depths of human experience, that help us understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. They gave us the idea of empire, of political organization on a scale that transcends tribal and ethnic boundaries, that creates space for diverse cultures to interact and learn from each other. Most fundamentally, they gave us the concept of progress, the idea that human life can be improved through knowledge, effort, and cooperation, that we're not condemned to endless repetition of the past, but can create something better for our children. These gifts didn't come without cost. Mesopotamian civilization was built on slavery, warfare, environmental exploitation. Like all human achievements, it was a mixture of light and shadow, progress and regression, wisdom and folly. But the balance, we think, is clearly positive. The innovations and insights developed in ancient Mesopotamia created possibilities for human flourishing that continue to enrich our lives today. As we close this exploration of humanity's first great civilization, we're struck by how relevant their story remains. In our own time of rapid change, global connectivity, and environmental challenge, the Mesopotamian experience offers both inspiration and warning. It reminds us that human civilization is not inevitable, that it requires constant effort to maintain, constant adaptation to survive. It shows us that even the greatest powers can fall if they fail to respond to changing circumstances. But it also demonstrates the incredible resilience of human creativity, the way that ideas and innovations can survive the collapse of the societies that created them, spreading and evolving to become part of humanity's common heritage. The Mesopotamians built the first civilization, but in a very real sense, we're all still living in the world they created. Every time we write a letter, follow a law, solve a mathematical problem, look up at the stars and wonder about our place in the cosmos, we're drawing on insights first developed in the cities beside the Tigris and Euphrates. Their story is our story, the ongoing human adventure of learning to live together, to build meaning from chaos, to create beauty from the raw materials of existence. And that adventure continues, in laboratories and classrooms, in cities and villages, in the dreams and efforts of people around the world who are still trying to answer the fundamental questions the Mesopotamians first posed. How shall we live? What shall we build? What legacy shall we leave for those who come after us? The rivers still flow. The Tigris and Euphrates still carry their ancient waters from the mountains to the sea. But the civilization they once nurtured lives on in ways its creators could never have imagined, in the global network of knowledge and culture that connects all humanity in a single, ever-expanding conversation about the meaning and possibility of human life. Before we say goodbye, we'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. Your support helps us continue these journeys through the forgotten corners of human history, bringing ancient voices back to life for modern ears. The Mesopotamians are gone, but their gifts remain. Their cities have crumbled, but their ideas still shape our world. Their empires have fallen, but their example of human creativity and achievement continues to inspire. In the end, perhaps that's the most important lesson of Mesopotamian civilization, that what we create, the knowledge we preserve, the beauty we add to the world, these things can outlast any individual life, any particular society, any specific age. The first civilization fell, but civilization itself survived, grew, spread, became the common inheritance of all humanity. And in that continuation, that transformation, that eternal human refusal to let knowledge and beauty die, the ancient Mesopotamians achieved a kind of immortality that even Gilgamesh might have envied. The story ends, but the conversation continues. The tablets crumble, but the words survive. The empires fall, but the human spirit endures, still reaching toward the light, still building, still dreaming, still writing the next chapter in the endless story of human becoming. From all of us here at Simply About Earth, thank you for joining us on this journey through the cradle of civilization. Until next time, keep wondering, keep exploring, keep listening for the whispers of the past that still echo in the present moment. The rivers flow on, and so do we. But before we close this chapter completely, let's take one final walk through the archaeological legacy that continues to reveal new secrets about humanity's first civilization. The rediscovery of Mesopotamian civilization in the 19th and 20th centuries reads like a detective story, scholars piecing together clues from scattered fragments, deciphering forgotten languages, reconstructing vanished worlds from broken pottery and crumbling tablets. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The trilingual inscription carved into the cliff at Behistun in western Iran, which recorded the achievements of the Persian king Darius I in Old Persian, Elamite and Babylonian. Henry Rawlinson, a British army officer stationed in the region, spent years climbing the dangerous cliff face to copy these inscriptions, and in the process provided the key that would unlock 3,000 years of Mesopotamian literature. Using the known Old Persian as a guide, Rawlinson and other scholars gradually worked out the meanings of the cuneiform signs, discovering that what they had assumed was a single language was actually dozens of different languages written in the same script: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Hittite, Hurrian, Elamite, an entire family of ancient civilizations speaking to the modern world across millennia of silence. The impact of these discoveries on European consciousness was profound. Suddenly, human civilization was far older and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The classical Greeks and Romans, long considered the founders of Western civilization, were revealed to be relatively recent newcomers to an ancient conversation that had been going on for millennia. Leonard Woolley's excavations at Nearth in the 1920s revealed another stunning aspect of Mesopotamian civilization: the royal cemetery of the early dynastic period, where kings and queens had been buried with magnificent treasures of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. The tomb of Queen Poabi contained a golden headdress so intricate and beautiful that modern jewelers struggle to understand how it was made. 62 attendants had voluntarily accompanied their queen to the afterlife, their bodies arranged around hers in perfect order, showing a level of social organization and religious commitment that challenged every assumption about primitive ancient societies. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery was yet to come. At the site of Kanesh in Turkey, archaeologists found over 23,000 cuneiform tablets, documenting the activities of Assyrian merchants in the early 2nd millennium BCE. These weren't royal inscriptions or religious texts. They were business correspondence, contracts, account books, family letters, the everyday paperwork of Bronze Age international trade. Reading these tablets is like stepping into the office of an ancient trading company. We meet merchants worrying about their caravans crossing dangerous mountain passes, wives managing businesses while their husbands travel, children learning the family trade, partners dissolving and forming new alliances. One merchant writes to his wife, "The prices here are terrible, but I can't come home empty-handed. Send me whatever silver you can find, and don't worry about the bandits on the roads. I have protection money for them." Another letter from a business partner reads, "Your brother is drinking too much and neglecting the shop. Either talk to him or I'll find a new partner. The copper from Cyprus is late again, and our customers are getting impatient." These tablets reveal a Bronze Age world far more sophisticated and connected than anyone had imagined. Merchants operating across thousands of miles with letters of credit, insurance contracts, partnership agreements, legal and financial instruments that wouldn't be out of place in a modern business environment. The archives at Mari revealed another aspect of ancient life, diplomatic correspondence between the great powers of the Bronze Age, showing a level of international relations that rivaled anything in the modern world. Kings exchanged gifts and daughters, negotiated trade agreements and military alliances, sent ambassadors and spies to gather intelligence about their rivals. One letter from the king of Mari to his ambassador in Babylon reads like something from a modern foreign ministry. "I have heard that my brother in Babylon is planning to sign a treaty with our enemies. Find out if this is true, and if so, remind him of our long friendship and mutual interests. But be subtle about it. We don't want to seem desperate." The discovery of archives at Ebla in Syria added another dimension to our understanding of Bronze Age civilization. Here was a kingdom that controlled trade routes from Anatolia to Egypt, keeping meticulous records in a language related to Hebrew and Arabic, showing that the Semitic peoples had been major players in ancient international politics from the very beginning. Each new discovery added complexity to the picture of ancient Mesopotamia, revealing not a simple primitive society, but a rich, diverse civilization that had grappled with all the challenges that still face us today. Modern technology continues to reveal new aspects of ancient Mesopotamia. Satellite imagery shows the remains of vast irrigation systems stretching across the landscape. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures without excavation. Chemical analysis of tablets tells us about ancient scribal practices and trade routes. Digital humanities projects are revolutionizing our understanding of Mesopotamian civilization. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative has made high-resolution photographs of hundreds of thousands of tablets available online, allowing scholars around the world to collaborate on translations and interpretations. Machine learning algorithms are being trained to read cuneiform, potentially allowing us to translate the hundreds of thousands of tablets that remain unstudied in museum collections around the world. Some estimates suggest that we've only read about 5% of the cuneiform literature that's been discovered. Imagine what treasures remain hidden in those unread tablets. 3D printing is allowing museums to share replicas of precious artifacts with schools and communities that could never afford to see the originals. Children in rural communities can now hold exact replicas of Mesopotamian cylinder seals, experience the weight and texture of objects created 4,000 years ago. Virtual reality reconstructions are bringing ancient cities back to life. You can now walk through a digitally reconstructed Babylon, climb the ziggurat of Ur, explore the palace of Ashurbanipal, experiencing these ancient spaces in ways that would have been impossible even for the archaeologists who discovered them. But technology is only a tool. The real work of understanding Mesopotamian civilization still requires the careful, patient effort of scholars who devote their lives to learning ancient languages, understanding cultural contexts, piecing together fragmentary evidence to reconstruct vanished worlds. What emerges from all this scholarship is a picture of remarkable complexity and sophistication. Mesopotamian civilization wasn't a single, monolithic culture, but a diverse, constantly evolving tradition that adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining core values and practices across millennia. The Sumerians developed the fundamental technologies and institutions, writing, cities, irrigation, organized religion, professional armies, but each subsequent culture added its own innovations and refinements. The Akkadians created the first multi-ethnic empire and developed diplomatic practices that would influence international relations for centuries. The Babylonians perfected legal systems and mathematical techniques that remain impressive today. The Assyrians created administrative and military innovations that enabled unprecedented territorial control. Each culture learned from its predecessors while adding something new, creating a cumulative tradition of knowledge and experience that grew more sophisticated over time. This pattern of cultural continuity combined with innovation is perhaps Mesopotamia's most important legacy. They showed that human societies can preserve what's valuable from the past while still adapting to new challenges and opportunities. As we think about our own rapidly changing world, with its global connections and local challenges, its technological innovations and ancient human needs, the Mesopotamian example offers both inspiration and guidance. Like the ancient Mesopotamians, we live in a time of unprecedented change. New technologies are transforming how we work, communicate, and understand the world. Global trade networks connect distant peoples in ways that would have amazed even the most cosmopolitan Babylonian merchants. Environmental challenges require coordinated responses on a scale that would have impressed the organizers of ancient irrigation systems. The challenges we face, climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, cultural conflict, aren't entirely new. The Mesopotamians faced similar challenges and developed solutions that sustained their civilization for thousands of years. They showed that large, diverse societies can be held together by shared values and institutions rather than force alone, that economic systems can balance individual enterprise with collective welfare, that cultural traditions can be preserved while still allowing for innovation and change. They also showed the dangers of environmental overexploitation, political rigidity, and military overextension. Their failures offer lessons as valuable as their successes. But perhaps most importantly, they demonstrated the power of human creativity and cooperation. They showed that people working together can accomplish things that no individual could achieve alone, can create beauty and meaning even in harsh circumstances, can build institutions that outlast any particular generation. The cuneiform tablets that preserve Mesopotamian literature weren't just record-keeping devices. They were humanity's first attempt to speak across time, to share wisdom and experience with future generations who might face similar challenges. Reading those tablets today, we're participating in a conversation that began over 5,000 years ago, a conversation about how to live well, how to create just societies, how to find meaning in the face of uncertainty and mortality. The ancient Mesopotamians couldn't have imagined our modern world, but they would have recognized our fundamental concerns. How do we balance competing interests fairly? How do we preserve knowledge for future generations? How do we create beauty and meaning in our brief time on Earth? Their answers won't work perfectly for us. Our circumstances are different, our challenges more complex in some ways, but their example of facing difficulties with creativity, courage, and determination remains as relevant today as it was 5,000 years ago. The ziggurats have crumbled, but the human impulse to reach towards something greater than ourselves continues in every skyscraper, every space mission, every attempt to transcend the limitations of our earthbound existence. The ancient empires have fallen, but the dream of uniting diverse peoples under common institutions of justice and law continues in every international organization, every multinational corporation, every effort to create global solutions to global problems. The cuneiform tablets have given way to digital files, but the fundamental human need to record, preserve, and share knowledge continues in every library, every database, every attempt to capture and transmit human experience across space and time. In this sense, Mesopotamian civilization isn't ancient history. It's the foundation of the ongoing human project of creating meaning, order, and beauty in a complex and often challenging world. The story of ancient Mesopotamia is ultimately the story of human potential, of what we can accomplish when we work together, when we're willing to innovate and experiment, when we refuse to accept that things must remain as they've always been. But it's also a story of human responsibility, of the need to carefully steward the resources and institutions that make civilization possible, to adapt to changing circumstances before crisis forces change upon us, to remember that even the greatest achievements require constant care and attention to survive. As we face our own civilizational challenges, environmental degradation, social inequality, technological disruption, cultural fragmentation, the Mesopotamian example reminds us that these aren't new problems, that humans have faced and overcome similar difficulties before. But it also reminds us that success isn't guaranteed, that civilizations, even great ones, can fail if they become too rigid, too exploitative, too disconnected from the environmental and social realities that sustain them. The Mesopotamians ultimately couldn't solve all their problems. Climate change, political instability, and environmental degradation eventually overwhelmed their adaptive capacity. But they endured for over 3,000 years, longer than any civilization before or since, and their innovations continue to shape our world today. Their legacy isn't in the ruins that dot the Iraqi landscape. It's in the institutions, technologies, and ideas that form the foundation of modern civilization. Every time we write a letter, follow a law, use mathematics to solve a problem, look up at the stars and wonder about our place in the cosmos, we're drawing on insights first developed in the cities beside the Tigris and Euphrates. The ancient Mesopotamians achieved a kind of immortality that they themselves might not have recognized, not the personal immortality that Gilgamesh sought, but something perhaps more valuable, the immortality of ideas, of innovations that outlast any individual or society that creates them. Their greatest achievement wasn't any particular building or empire. It was demonstrating that human beings can transcend their individual limitations through cooperation, creativity, and the patient accumulation of knowledge across generations. That demonstration continues to inspire us today, in every school where children learn to read and write, in every laboratory where scientists push the boundaries of knowledge, in every courtroom where justice is sought, in every effort to create a more perfect world for future generations. The rivers still flow. The Tigris and Euphrates still carry their ancient waters from the mountains to the sea. The cities that once lined their banks have crumbled into dust, but the human spirit that built those cities, that wrote those laws, that dreamed those dreams, that spirit lives on in every human heart that refuses to accept the world as it is and works to create the world as it could be. The first civilization has fallen, but civilization itself continues, carried forward by each generation that chooses to preserve what's valuable from the past while building something new for the future. And in that continuation, that eternal human refusal to let knowledge and beauty and hope die with those who first created them, the ancient Mesopotamians achieved exactly the kind of immortality that matters most, the immortality of influence, of legacy, of seeds planted in the soil of human consciousness that continue to grow and bear fruit thousands of years after the gardeners themselves have returned to dust. Their story doesn't end with the fall of their last empire. It continues in every human effort to build, to learn, to create, to connect across the barriers of time and space and difference that separate us from one another. We are all, in some sense, children of Mesopotamia, inheritors of the first great experiment in human civilization, carriers of traditions that began beside two rivers in the dawn of recorded history. The conversation they started continues in every classroom and laboratory, in every parliament and courtroom, in every library and museum, in every human heart that dreams of a better world and works to make that dream reality. The tablets may crumble, but the words endure. The cities may fall, but the ideals survive. The rivers may change their course, but the human journey toward wisdom, justice, and beauty flows on. The ancient conversation continues, and you're part of it. The journey flows on, and so do we. Thank you for joining us at Simply About Earth, where ancient voices still whisper their wisdom to those who know how to listen.